my name is Chloe Freeland, and today I'm here with Rachel Dworkin, who works at the Historical Society of Chemung County. And today we're going to be talking about Ernie Davis, his life, kind of the past, and the historical circumstances surrounding his life, and other topics along that line. So let's begin.
Okay.
Would you mind telling us a little bit about yourself?
My name is Rachel Dworkin. I'm the archivist here at the Chemung County Historical Society. I have a BA in history from Bryn Mawr College in Pennsylvania and a master's in information and library science from SUNY Albany. I've worked here for almost 12 years now.
That's awesome. So starting off, can you just tell us a little bit about Ernie Davis's life and kind of just give us the basic history about Ernie Davis?
Okay, so Ernie Davis was born in Pennsylvania in 1939. He lived there until he was 12 when he moved to Elmira, and he lived here pretty much the rest of his life. He attended Elmira Free Academy, where he played baseball, basketball, football, was an all-around athlete, but also a really big academic success as well. He attended Syracuse University, where he played football and was awarded the Heisman Trophy, and he was actually the first black man to be awarded the Heisman Trophy. And he was drafted to play football for the Cleveland Browns, but he was diagnosed with leukemia and died before he ever got a chance to play, and that was in 1963 when he died.
Now that we have a little bit of history about Ernie Davis's life, can you tell me a little bit about kind of the point that America was in during his time in college?
Okay.
Early 1960s, late 1950s.
It was during the Civil Rights Movement, where the Civil Rights Movement was like starting to gain momentum and speed. And, so there was like Jim Crow going on in the South. In the North, it was a little bit more complicated. And I think it's more important when talking about Ernie to talk about his experiences in the North. So here in Elmira, there was an African-American enclave on the east side, and then there was a smaller one on the south side. And if you were black, you could not rent or buy a home outside of that area because people just wouldn't rent or sell to you. And when they decided to put in new public housing, there was black public housing at Jones Court, and then there was public housing for white people, and you did not get into the public housing for white people if you were black. Schools were integrated, but back in the 1940s, they actually had to fight to allow blacks to be allowed into clubs at high school. So they could attend school, but they couldn't attend clubs. And so he would have been after that time period, but there was still issues. We have an interview in our collection of a man by the name of Leo Huey, who was on the basketball team with Davis, and he talked about how there was an unspoken rule that there could be no more than 4 black players on the court at any given time because they didn't want to upset the white players and the white parents. So even though the black boys were better players, they couldn't have them all on the team playing at one time because they were afraid of how the white families would perceive that. A lot of black students were pushed into the vocational track rather than the academic track. And so a lot of the boys who did wind up going on to college, mostly on athletic scholarships, were often sort of unprepared because the school hadn't really done anything to get them ready to go to college because they were like, yeah, they're just gonna get factory jobs. But most of the factories didn't particularly want black workers, or at least not in skilled positions. So there were a lot of black men working in foundries in the area, so like GE and Kennedy Valve. But when it came to places like Westinghouse or Remington Rand or any of the more factory stuff, they had a hard time breaking in. And they also had a hard time getting into trades like plumbing and electricians and that sort of thing because the white workers just didn't want them there. So there was discrimination that was definitely happening, but it wasn't written into law the way that the Jim Crow laws were written into law. It was more just de facto, and people being like, well, they're not the right sort of people to live here. They're not the right sort of people for this job. We don't want to ruffle feathers.
Right.
So that was the kind of thing that he was facing in the North. Incidentally, he was the first black boy who was prom king here at Elmira Free Academy. So like he was, breaking barriers and that sort of thing. And again, with Leo Huey, his friend from the basketball team, like they had a lot of white friends, but it was always white male friends. Like a black boy could not be friends with a white girl without there being issues. That was what was going on here.
Right.
As opposed to what was going on in the Deep South, which was a more blatant and legal and in-your-face sort of discrimination.
Do you know anything about kind of the integration of Syracuse University? I know that they had been accepting black students like more previously than Ernie Davis, and that he was he definitely not the first.
He was not the first black student.
Yeah.
I don't know how many black students there were on campus. I don't really have those statistics.
Right.
But interestingly enough, Ernie Davis joined a fraternity that was traditionally a Jewish fraternity, and he was the first black kid to be part of that fraternity.
Do you know, did he have any kind of relation with Judaism, or do you know anything about his religious?
He was not a Jew, but the east side of Elmira was home to both the black community and the Jewish community, so it's entirely probable that he had friends who were Jewish.
Okay.
But I don't know like why he picked that particular fraternity.
Okay, thank you. How did racism impact his life? And do you have any specific instances of that that you can pick out?
Okay, so in 1960, following the Cotton Bowl game in Texas, he and the other black players on the team weren't allowed to participate as fully as the other members of the team in a banquet that happened afterwards. And there are like conflicting reports whether or not it was that they got to have the dinner but were ushered out as part before the dessert was served, or if they weren't allowed at all or whatever. So there are a number of conflicting reports, and that's like one of the overt examples of racism that we have in Ernie Davis's life. But when you're talking about the other things, I mean, it's sort of hard to say, like, yes, this is how it impacted him. He lived on the east side. His house is gone now. It would have been where Ernie Davis Park is, which was like I said, a traditionally black neighborhood that was repeatedly subject to urban renewal. And so originally that neighborhood had a lot of black homeowners, and then they were like, let's build Jones Court as public housing. So they eminent domained a lot of these people's homes, gave them a pittance for the housing, and then just knocked down that entire neighborhood. So people went from being homeowners with the possibility of intergenerational wealth to you're now a renter. Was that a product of racism? You can't like prove it, but it so when he was on the basketball team and the baseball team and on the football team, and you're only allowed to play a certain amount of time because we can't upset the white families. Again, it's not a big in-your-face racism like what happened after the Cotton Bowl, but it is impacting his life in multiple subtle ways.
How has Ernie Davis impacted this community?
Okay, so Ernie Davis was a hugely popular figure. When they held his funeral, like tens of thousands of people showed up and sort of funneled through the funeral procession at the neighborhood house. There are a number of things that are named after him here. So there's Ernie Davis Park, where his house used to be. There is the Ernie Davis Center at EOP, which is what the old neighborhood house was. And there's also Ernie Davis Middle School. They built, so the original EFA is now Finn Academy, but it was at one point the Ernie Davis Middle School. They built a new EFA on Hoffman Street. And a lot of people within the African American community were really pushing for that new high school to be Ernie Davis High School. And ultimately they decided not to do that and instead name Elmira the middle school in what had been the old high school after Ernie Davis. And so there, for a lot of people who were involved in lobbying for the high school to be named after him, there was a certain amount of sour grapes.
When all of these different parks and places are named after Ernie Davis, do you think that helps people learn or gain awareness of him and his characteristics and kind of his breaking barriers? Or, like, what do you feel it signifies when they name things after him?
Well, I think anytime you name something after somebody, it tells you that it tells people that you value that person.
Right.
So we've got schools in this town named after Dr. Arthur Booth, after George M. Diven, after George Washington, and after Ernie Davis. And so that says something about who we value and why we value them.
What does Ernie Davis stand for?
We value him as a society because he's good at sports ball and because he broke barriers and did it with grace and aplomb, and that he was also a studious person and someone who, when diagnosed with what was at the time a fatal illness, kept fighting and kept being hopeful and strong and never gave up. And I think those are traits that are wonderful and that we as a society value.
My last question is, how do you relate to Ernie Davis?
My parents went to Syracuse University. I didn't grow up here, so I didn't really grow up with him as being a household name or anyone that I'd ever actually heard of until I came out here and they're like, oh yeah, Ernie Davis. It was more that I've learned about him working here and come to appreciate him as a historical figure and as sort of a symbol within our community.
Actually, last question. I'm here as an applicant for the Ernie Davis Scholarship, and you said that there have been other applicants who go to the Historical Society to kind of get information and help them with their projects. And can you kind of explain the impact of kind of the scholarship and also the students applying to the scholarship on either the community or this historical society event?
The scholarship and the fact that there has to be an aspect where you learn about Ernie Davis. I think that sort of helps keep the memory of him alive. A lot of the people who knew him are dying. Lewis Stark, who was someone who grew up with him, just within the last couple of months passed away. And so all of the people who can really say Ernie Davis stood for whatever, or Ernie Davis was like whatever, they're almost all gone. And having an annual renewal of his memory by the younger people who are now doing the research, I think really helps keeps that his name alive within our community. And I think that's really kind of cool. And I also think that we as an institution benefit from that because, once a year we get at least one or two kids coming in going, show me what you have, let me learn from you. And so you're learning about us as a resource. Presumably, the people that you're talking to about this project are learning that we're a resource. The couple of times that we've hosted student-written exhibits, they've brought their friends and family in to see the exhibits. We did an exhibit opening once where they had, all of their friends and family coming in. And so that brings in people who are like, oh, you have this other stuff? That's cool too.
Right.
And so it helps keep our name within the community as much as Ernie Davis's name, which is really cool and a benefit to us and hopefully a benefit to you. And I think overall it's a good deal, not only for us or for you or for the community. So I think it's a good deal all around.
All right, awesome. So thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate you taking time out of your day for this. And so, yeah, that's all for now.